Our guest today thinks there could be a quarterback change coming the next time the Badgers football team sees the field. Coming up on Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fam? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. Sorry for the last minute. It's been a couple of days of fun roller coaster ups and downs and news. Thank you for being here for all of it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and you'll get $100 or $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We're talking about basketball today. John Tonje, the transfer portal, and obviously Phil Longo has been fired. We're talking quarterback stuff. Let's get Kedrick Stumbris on the show. One of my favorites. I say this every time you're on here, and I say this when you're not on here. I talk behind your back, but it's okay because it's good things. One of the most authentic, intelligent Badger voices out there. So I'm always stoked when I can get Kedrick on the show. And I'm going to start here. We both talked about Longo today. Do you think with Longo moving on, and I tease it a little bit, I kind of think you do from what you said, but do you think we see Mabrey Mettauer start next week?
I think so. And I do share your general sentiment from your live reaction show earlier today that part of me wants to say no, because I do think that Luke Fickell is inherently conservative in these personnel moves. However, the Phil Longo firing right now does kind of cut against that theory at least a little bit. You fire a guy 23 games into a tenure isn't necessarily a fully conservative move. He made plenty of staff changes last offseason as well. Hiring Phil Longo in the first place was inherently, an aggressive move rather than a conservative one. And I don't entirely know why you fire Luke Fickell, except for some of the personal stuff that has been seemingly boiling under the surface there. That you fire Phil Longo now. I don't know why you do it now if it's not to make a bigger wholesale change that you think, because I don't know what a Braden Locke offense called by Kenny Guyton or Nate Letton or anybody else on the offensive staff gives you more than that offense being called by Phil Longo.
Let me ask you this, because I'm kind of at the point is I actually don't think, and you mentioned this, I don't think they're going to make the change, but I think they should, because this Wisconsin passing offense is statistically 14th in, I think, passer rating. I mean, it's near the bottom of every metric. Mm-hmm. People always say, well, how much worse could it be? And a lot of times I scoff at that. I'm like, no, things could always be a lot worse. Absolutely. But I don't actually know if they could be a ton worse with a freshman. Then you look at just statistically what Wisconsin has done through the passing game. 12 of 28 last week. There was easily a couple turnovers left on the field that Oregon didn't capitalize on with a fumble and a drop pick. There was the turnover to end the game. I don't know if you're getting much worse production from a true freshman, even if he's not fully ready. And let's be honest, he's not fully ready because he's a true freshman. But if he gives you a little something with the legs, I don't see how it can be a ton worse.
I think the something with the legs is the X factor that gives me a little bit more push to being more intrigued by maybe Mettauer. Because I mean, it can be worse. It absolutely can be. I know, what was it, 3.6 yards per attempt on Saturday night. It doesn't make it 3.4. God, doesn't make it feel like it can be much, if at all, worse, but it certainly can be. It can be with a guy who's really young. This is a new level of football. Say what you will about Nebraska and Minnesota as quality opponents, or lack thereof. But when you are trying to do so many new things on the fly and changing the play caller at the same time, although Mettauer has never, received play calls from Phil Longo in game, it's still something he has repped in practice, presumably just repped in the bye week. If you're changing that too, that's a big change up for a team where, in a place that you and I think are kind of dissimilar in this take. You think they aren't going to, but you think you want them to. I kind of think they are going to, and I'm less sold on the idea. Putting the third longest bowl streak in the country in the hands of a freshman feels like a big ask. Yeah.
I think that's fair. And that's what Badger Brewpack asked. Do you dare put the Bolshevik in the hands of a freshman quarterback? I would ask, do you dare put it in the hands of Braden Locke? I think both are. And listen, I don't think there's necessarily a great answer there. Unless,
No.
I will say this, to your point, going on the road, Locke is going to make line calls. Locke is taking hits in the pocket. There are some intangible things there that I can definitely see your point on.
You're going on the road against a Nebraska team that is 0-9 in its last 9 games trying to clinch bowl eligibility over multiple seasons. Yes, fake sellout streak at Memorial Stadium aside, that crowd is going to be up for a game in which they are desperate to beat a team like Wisconsin, see them down, and hungry to get to a bowl game. And that scares me about putting just from a fan perspective, that worries me about putting a true freshman in that environment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's very, very fair. All right, let's get to the rest of these comments. Again, this was kind of the community show, so we wanted to hit on Longo quarterbacks. We got a bunch of comments that came in. I just want to hit this one from Cobblestone. Do you think we see Yakimelli now this week with Longo gone? Do you think you maybe see Yak, or with Longo gone, maybe any other players outside of Mabrey, which we talked about, that have a bigger role?
I think there's potentially room to carve out here for tight ends to see an expanded role in this offense, just because they haven't been a feature so far, and obviously some of that is they lost 2 or 3 tight ends unexpectedly going into camp last year. You get to the first day of camp and you have a significant thinning out of bodies that you weren't expecting, and that makes it a lot harder to expect production out of that room. And now you're kind of rolling with the same thing in that room, very young at a position that takes a while for players to mature. But when you are trying your darndest with the wide receivers, and especially if you think you're going to get Mabrey Mettauer, and you can maybe use a tight end as a security blanket, how much, if we see Mettauer, this becomes a much harder question to answer. Who are the guys that he likes to go to? Who are the guys that he has built rapport with over the course of camp and practices and in the bye week? There could be answers to this question that we aren't necessarily thinking about right now. I would think Yak sees some extra reps just from a start throwing spaghetti at the wall perspective. I don't know. What about you? The lack of Yakimelli usage here still dumbfounds me. I don't get it. And maybe I am just not enough of a ball knower to get it. But at a certain point, the numbers are the numbers to me.
I think the numbers are the numbers. Like the point I made early in the season with Yak when he's averaging like 8.3 per carry, and he's still up in that range. I'm like, you just keep doing that until he's not averaging 8+ yards a carry. It's not more complicated than that. You made a really good point when we were talking pre-show, actually, because I've been thinking, honestly, the staff kind of painted themselves in a corner with Yak, and now they're reticent to give him more reps because if he goes down and balls out, it's going to look even worse on them. But you made the point, well, with Longo gone, maybe you said the fall guy, but I like a better term. Like you kind of did remove you changed it up, and this opens the door for maybe new things to happen. So I would love to see a couple reps from Yak, but I don't think we will. I really think that ship has sailed.
Yeah, just from a mentality standpoint, like you're getting at there, maybe it is just, we can't put Yak in now. We've entrenched ourselves into having him not play, but now there's the new offensive coordinator, new play caller, and we could say it was his idea. He was a genius all along, but most of the time, isn't this like a position coach decision anyway, a Devin Spalding decision? I
think it's all like especially in today's
clearly it's more than one person.
Yeah, and I think in today's world of NIL and all those things, there's deeper conversations always being had that further like muddy the waters, right? Like, does this player need some reps? Yeah. Otherwise, we're worried about it. That type of stuff. And that's not a Wisconsin thing. That's a college football thing.
Absolutely.
Every school is dealing with those things. This is from Dan Fodgree. Is NIL in the transfer market helping or hurting college football, especially at the quarterback position?
Certainly makes it different. At the quarterback position in particular, I think is the biggest question. I think the last time I was on your show, I compared quarterback NIL recruiting in the transfer portal. It's the closest thing college football recruiting has to college basketball recruiting right now, where it's kind of this one-to-one plug and play. We just throw certain dollar amounts at you and off you go, where an individual player can make such a big difference. Cam Ward at Miami, for example. And it's not that Miami doesn't have a good roster around him, but like, my God, sometimes it is just Cam Ward pulling a rabbit out of his hat down there in Coral Gables. Better or worse, I don't know. I think it gives, if you are a program that feels like you are really close, it gives you something to fundraise off of and say, we need your help to go get however many X millions of dollars to help get us over the hump. It's a thing that's maybe a little bit more tangible if you are a fundraiser, and easy to do. I don't know. Stuff like this has always existed. I think it's just better overall to get it out in the open more than anything. So I don't have strong feelings about it, particularly being at Wisconsin, where they're going to play, they're going to throw some money around, but they're never going to find themselves in a real bidding war, I don't think.
Yeah, I think generally it helps it. To me, it adds kind of a hot stove component. I'm a baseball guy. I love baseball.
Good. That's a good take.
Like, it just creates more energy and excitement. Like, how many shows did I do about Tyler Van Dyke throwing 25 touchdowns this year? Oh, 3 or 4 of them, right? Last year's Tanner Mordecai. Like, it just, and every school is that way. It's almost like you have the ability to go land quarterbacks, and then you talk about which ones could be and what could this guy fit into that. It just generates excitement year round. I'm not against it. I think the kind of year round excitement around it helps. Now, to your point, Wisconsin's in a spot that not all schools are in, right? There's some schools, a lower level school. If I'm covering App State, I'm probably not feeling the same way. And like, I don't know. I think generally the buzz and the excitement helps the program and the sport in general.
Yeah, I think that the NFL is the perfect comp there, where they do such a good job, building their calendar so that you are talking about the NFL year round, where the season ends and then you dive into free agency, and then free agency kind of fizzles out, and right after that you get the draft, and it all just kind of rolls directly into rookie mini camps, and everything rolls together so nicely. The ability for us to be talking about college sports and college recruiting year round is certainly helped by the transfer portal in a certain way, but there's obviously the complaint that's like, oh, I'd love to not be talking about the portal and coaching hires and whatever dollar amounts and NIL while I'm waiting for my team to go play in the bowl game, or looking at who is opting out mid-season. But the schools need to do some things that they don't want to do if they're going to solve that problem. So,
all right, coming up, we're going to talk about Luke Fickell. What does he need to do next year to not be in the hot seat with another 7-5 or worse season? Assuming we finish in that range this year, would that put him on the hot seat? That's coming up next. I'm going to get Kedrick's take on that on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at 5 Hour Energy. And listen, this is my 3rd show today, because I did a stock up, stock down show. I think I had Longo stock up. No, I'm kidding. But this is my 3rd show today. Like, you need energy as a fan. Fuel your fandom at limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy 12 packs available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. Right now, 5 Hour Energy, they know no matter what team you root for, no matter what you're doing, it takes a ton of heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate, ironing your jersey, setting up your TV, your nacho plate, your wings, your grill, whatever it is, it takes a ton of energy. Whatever you need, fuel your fandom with 5 Hour Energy, available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. Today's episode also brought to you by Game Time. Listen, no matter what, man, we all have a Phil Longo end date on our lives. There's going to be a point where we are shown the door no matter what, and we're going to be 6 feet under. Not that he died. That's a bad analogy. My point is, go do stuff in life. Go do fun things. Go get tickets to the concert, the comedy show, the sporting event. Go do those things on Game Time before we're Phil Longo'd out the door. You're never going to get to the end of the road and be like, man, I wish I did too much stuff. I did too much stuff in my life. No, you're never going to say that. Go get the tickets to whatever you're trying to get over at Game Time. Download the tickets without the stress over at Game Time. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. All right, let's get back into this. We got Kedrick. As always, my friend, I want to give you an opportunity. Where can people find everything you got going on, your work? Where can they follow you?
Oh, thank you. You can find me covering the Badgers for Athlon Sports. Find me on the website, formerly known as Twitter, now X, also Blue Sky, at Kedrick Stumbris. Just My name, first and last. Also host the Scotty Six Pack podcast, doing a lot of a lot of shows this weekend. Talking all things about not just the Badgers, but also the Packers, Brewers, Bucks, basically anything Wisconsin sports. I'll probably be going live from the Kohl Center tomorrow night after the men's basketball game. I typically get out of there after interviews, so I tend to go live a little bit after your show here, Ryan, wraps up. So if folks are real wired after the Badgers hopefully beat the UTRGV Vaqueros tomorrow night, you can stay tuned and go find me.
Definitely go check it out. Again, one of the most authentic voices and most intelligent voices that I found covering the Badgers. So it's always humbling to have him on. Jesse, why? If we are 7-5 or worse in 3 years in a row, do we move on from Fickell after year 3? Nebraska got sick of Pelini going 9-3, and I'd kill for 9-3 right now. Thoughts? If it's another 6-7 win season, this season's not over. We may not get to 6-7, but if you have 3 kind of mediocre years in a row, what's the hot seat?
Absolutely not hot at all. I mean, unless they look like they haven't improved anything in the new offensive coordinator situation fizzles out. 7-5 on its face doesn't make anything worse for Luke Fickell next year. They play Alabama again in the non-con. They still have to play Iowa. They still have to play. They play Ohio State next year. It's
and we go to Oregon as well.
Right. They have to go to Oregon. They have to go to Washington, although Washington's obviously a little bit of a dumpster fire this year. No, they don't go to Washington. Never mind. They just go to Oregon. But their schedule next year is just as hard as it was this year, if not harder. You're playing at Oregon and at Alabama next year.
Yeah.
7-5 now is not the same as going 7-5 2 years ago. 7-5 now is much more impressive than going 7-5 2 years ago. The new Big Ten without divisions is a gauntlet, and the success there is an unfortunate happenstance here where the convergence of both the fall off from the post Paul Chryst 3 New Year's Six Bowls in 4 years trajectory also happened at the same time as you lose the Big Ten West. All of that coming to a head at once has the potential to really mess with fan emotions, where you feel like the Badgers are just going 7-5 every year, and it doesn't feel like it's getting any better. But going 7-5 now is a hell of a lot better than going 7-5 was in the Paul Chryst, Jim Leonard year. It's going to be really hard to go 7-5 year in and year out now. It's going to be really hard to go 8-4. 9-3 is something close to Wisconsin's ceiling, I think, in the new Big Ten. And that's okay. You're not Ohio State. You're not Oregon. At this moment in time, you're not Penn State. And there is something with having to come to terms with what you are in college football and college athletics overall that's really hard. And it's really hard to change it. Most programs never change their position in college athletics in a lifetime. And that's hard if you let it break your heart. But that's the fun of being a fan.
That doesn't sound like the fun part, Ketcher. Sports mortality sounds like the depressing part of this. What's the exchange rate? What's the exchange rate of a 7-5 season here to the Big Ten West? Is that an equivalent to a 10-2 season?
That sounds about right to me, right? You miss out by a game by not necessarily a tiebreaker, but a full game to an Iowa for a Big Ten West title, right? That seems to be something close to the exchange rate. And maybe I'm too down on Wisconsin football right now because of the recency of everything. But that feels about right. I don't know. Do you think that sounds right?
I think so.
Okay.
And listen, to your point, it's a gauntlet, but it's not going to be a gauntlet to this level every year.
No, they're not scheduling Alabama moving forward, right? That was 100%. And sorry to interrupt you. That was a move made. That game was scheduled when this program was rocking and rolling. That was a game scheduled when they probably felt like, oh, even if we just go undefeated in the Big Ten West and lose in the Big Ten title game, they're not going to let us in the 4-team playoff. That was a great game to schedule in the 4-team playoff era. Unfortunately, that era died, and that game looked like a horrible decision in hindsight.
By the way, I'm going to go down to, my goal is to get to Tuscaloosa next year because like I'm going to be treated so well there. Wisconsin fans are going to be, because you're not going to be welcomed as like a hostile invader. They know they're going to beat the brakes off you, quite frankly. And if you're there and something miraculous happens, you're there. But for the most part, they're going to treat you in as like like we would treat, I don't know, Ball State or something. I'm just saying, like,
I don't think it's that bad.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to consider us like a threat. Like, there's not going to be animosity. They're going to welcome you at tailgates. They're going to enjoy it. I think it's going to be a ton of fun going down there as a Wisconsin fan.
I think so too. And I think there's enough like recent history there of some of the neutral site games and then them coming up here where there's just like good feelings built in over the last decade of like the fan bases seeing each other and nothing terrible happening. That it should be a good environment to get to if you're a Badger fan.
I agree. Let's bang this next one out here. Let's see. We're not going to be able to get to all these, which I kind of knew. Here's one. How much faith do you have in Luke Fickell hiring the offensive coordinator? Another comment we have down here, and this is a good question. Why should we feel excited about Fickell firing Longo, ... when he's the guy that hired Longo from West Wex?
I don't think that you necessarily should. It's not to say that you should feel any kind of way. I think you can find reasons to be excited. That reason being that they quickly realized that this was a mistake. And trying to take a power I offense and moving it basically from one polar opposite. And I know it's not like the triple option. It's not, Wisconsin wasn't lost in offense from the Stone Age, but trying to move so fast, so quickly to the opposite end of the spectrum was maybe something that this program wasn't, built for. It didn't make sense personnel wise, and to realize that kind of mistake and pull the plug on it, I think is a reason for optimism. Obviously the reason for pessimism is, the mistake was on Luke Fickell, and he's not going to get a third offensive coordinator hire. He's not going to get a third offensive coordinator hire, and neither is Chris McIntosh. That's the truth of it. Of course, that's with the caveat of, maybe that offensive coordinator kills it and gets a head coaching job somewhere, right? But there's plenty of reason to be worried. But if you are worried, I promise you aren't as worried as Luke Fickell is, and I promise you're not as worried as Chris McIntosh is.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I like where you went with it, though. Like, first of all, no one's ever going to bet 1,000. You're never going to nail every single hire you make as a coach. You're never going to do that. So I like the notion behind, like, we know this isn't working. Let's pull the plug. We're not going to give it another year. We know this isn't working. Pulling the plug. Let's move on. And I like the purpose behind that. Like, it's a very purposeful move. But yeah, like, you got to wonder. He's got to nail this hire. He has to absolutely nail this hire.
And he is Luke Fickell. Despite the Phil Longo of it all, Luke Fickell has shown a penchant for recognizing quickly when he is getting personnel right and when he's getting personnel wrong. It's the ousting of Jack McNeil, for example, right? That they quickly realized that wasn't working for them, and out the door he went. And getting Casey Robach feeling really good about it right away, and getting AJ Blazek and feeling really good about it right away. Knowing that he had to bring in his guys from the recruiting department, and knowing that he had to bring in Brady Collins. And some of that, of course, is the same college football familiarity, bringing in my guys and all that stuff. But there is something to be said for identifying mistakes early. And that's not just a Phil Longo thing for Luke Fickell. He's done that in a couple of other places too.
Yep, I agree. We're going to take one more quick break, come back. Who's better in the portal? Greg Gard, Luke Fickell. We're going to ask Kedrick that coming up next. Plus the more basketball talk coming up next, Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. I talk about FanDuel a lot. They're one of our longest partnerships on the Locked On Network. FanDuel, we've been partners with them longer than I've had some friends. And, you don't break up with good partners. You don't break up with good friends. And you don't break up with good partnerships. FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network for a reason. Parlay spreads, futures bets. Listen, if you were betting Badgers this weekend, you could have cleaned up. Like, you could have, obviously you had the Wisconsin, Arizona game. You could have taken the plus 14.5 against Oregon. You could have really cleaned up, done money line against the Wildcats. I don't do that because the only times I don't bet on the Badgers are when they cover, apparently. I lose lots of Anyway, if you had, like, it would have been a great weekend for you, but I do all that action over at FanDuel.com. Always do it responsibly. FanDuel.com right now. $5 bet gets you $150 in bonus bets if you win. That's FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, let's get back to Kedrick, and I wanted to throw it out there. Better in the portal, Luke Fickell or Greg Gard?
I would love to hedge on this and just say, like, these are not analogous questions.
The question was asked. We must answer it.
There's another way I could hedge and also say, like, data here is incomplete. Like, we don't have a great answer for Greg Gard on this, right? Like, we are four games in, and John Tonje looks like a grand slam walk off home run. But
big
like,
picture, not just for this year's cycle, because I think with Gard you can look back to Store, McGee.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about McGee because he's been here for so long. I mean, right now the hit rate on football transfers doesn't feel great. I think you probably feel better about Greg Gard. You have some guys in the portal from this year's class that feel like they're going to play really well. Obviously, Tackett Curtis feels like he's, even if not right now, is going to play a big role next year, and you feel good about that. Twee Walker has been really big this year. The biggest question mark in that class being Tyler Van Dyke. You just don't know. Again, so like another reason to kind of give them an incomplete grade, but real question about Tanner Mordecai brought in through the portal, and how much does that count with him being in and out of the lineup? You feel good about bringing in Will Pauling, but that's also a Cincinnati guy. Not like it's hard to say that's a full transfer. And Bryson Green's been up and down. I don't know. And then this year's portal class for Greg Gard, right? Cam Hunter seems to be on the end of the bench, and I don't know if I don't think that's what they expected. I think they expected a little bit better. I think they probably expected a little bit better early on from Xavier Amos. But the role that Kamari McGee has grown into is probably more than they ever expected of him. The role that John Tonje seemingly has on this team is more than they expected of him. Max Klesmit has, I mean, been a huge addition to this team ever since he got in there. I'm tempted to say Greg Gard, but it's just still, it's so early in the Fickell tenure. I mean, I'm talking about Kamari McGee, Max Klesmit, guys who have been here for 3 years. That it's hard to give a definitive answer one way or another, just because the sifting and winnowing through that data and making clean comparison without trying to compare apples and oranges feels hard to me.
Yeah, it is an impossible comparison, just with the numbers involved, the amount of staff involved, the money's different. I would lean, if I had to say it, I would say Gard, but like it's difficult. It's very difficult. I think Gard, it's interesting to me because I do think Gard, born out of the Bo Ryan shadow, who always had a reputation of being somebody who was maybe a little stubborn to a fault in a good way. I think people expected Gard to struggle heavily in the portal, and I think he's shown that he is maybe not that guy, and I think that should be encouraging for Badger fans, but it is a tough question to answer.
I think so too. In the shadow part, and I don't know. I assume the very Badger faithful here have watched Greg Gard's presser from Friday night. But like he was asked directly by Ben Worgel, who a great question by him, by the way, that I didn't even think to ask. He asked, I think it was him. It was either him or Jim Polzine of the State Journal and Badger Extra. How long it felt like it took him to step out of Bo Ryan's shadow. Of course, Bo Ryan being there on Friday, and Greg Gard had a real genuine like smile and like a sigh, and just very calmly said a very long time. And I don't know if he really felt like he stepped out of Bo Ryan's shadow maybe until Friday night. And so yeah,
right.
What you're getting at there with his embrace of the portal and some of the new things they're doing this year has impressed me for that reason too.
Next basketball question then. Will this team's shooting be good enough to overcome this team's rebounding? Obviously, if you watch the Wisconsin-Arizona game, there you saw the highs of the team's ability to shoot the ball, and you saw the lows of the team's ability to clean up the defensive glass.
They're not going to get out rebounded that bad, I think, the rest of the year. Arizona is something of a unique monster that I don't think another team on Wisconsin's schedule totally replicates. There isn't another roster that Wisconsin's going to play that has two guys in the front court of that size. Wisconsin should have something of a size advantage at 5-4 in the rest of their games going forward. Now, does that mean an aggressiveness on the glass advantage, given the play style of Stephen Crowell? Maybe not. But I don't think they're going to get out rebounded as bad. They gave up. Arizona had 24 offensive rebounds to Wisconsin's 2. I have to check every time because that's a stupid number.
Feels like a typo. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they're going to get out rebounded that badly again. That feels like a 1-of-1 scenario. And Purdue, for example, they lost Daniel Jacobson early this season. Badger fans will remember him from being recruited really heavily by Greg Gard in that roster. And unfortunately he broke his leg, just minutes into his season, basically. So that stinks for them. And obviously Purdue's going to be fine given that they beat Alabama at home on Friday night before Wisconsin's win too. But other teams just aren't going to have the same kind of athleticism and size in the front court that Arizona does. Tommy Lloyd has just a top-notch roster. That's probably the best team Wisconsin plays in the regular season all year. And I think given that their shooting probably is good enough to do it. I've been pleasantly surprised at how well they've shot the ball so far this season, to be honest. I was a little surprised at how effective everyone has been through 4 games.
Yeah, I think for the most part, and you're right on Arizona. Arizona also embraces attack the glass. Like they'll spend 2 or 3 bodies to it. So they have the athletes to do it, but it's also part of their mentality. Tommy Lloyd preaches that. I don't think we're going to see that again. There are going to be games. I'm just going to answer this question. There are going to be games where if you're going to shoot a bunch of threes, there are going to be some games where it doesn't go down. So not all the time is your shooting going to overcome it. But I think in the aggregate, I do think you're going to shoot well enough to overcome some of the issues that you're still going to have. Even not facing Arizona, this team has some liabilities interior on the post. They just do.
Oh, yeah.
But I do think the shooting is going to carry them through most of the season. I feel pretty confident they're going to continue to shoot that well. Last question here. Again, I've already kept you a couple minutes longer than I normally do.
You're good.
But I do appreciate it, man.
It's fun.
No, these shows are great. Tonje is the best player on this team. And this team is – and the second part of this team is going to have to outscore their opponents.
So to answer the second part first, like a real jerk. Yes. To win basketball games, you need to outscore your opponents. By definition.
Let's tackle the spirit of that question. Does this team need to win offensive shootouts, or can they win slower defensive grind-out games?
I would love to see them do it because they haven't done it now, going back to since 2023. Maybe there's a game on the schedule from 24 that I am forgetting. I'm looking now. They won that 65-41 game over Virginia, but they ran away with it at the Fort Myers tip-off. They won they did win a 61-59 game at Minnesota, and that game was gross. But this defense hasn't been the same as it has been in years past over the last 2 seasons. There is absolutely something more that this team needs to get out of its defense, particularly given the fact that sometimes, like you said, the ball is not going to go down every night. They are going to, at some point in time, need to win a game with defense if they are going to win it. And that is the danger of having a 3-point shooting offense place, such a big role on whether you live or die, particularly given the one and done postseason in this sport. So I think that I think so far, John Tonje has proven that he is for the time being the best player on this team. Could it be John Blackwell later in the year? Absolutely. Thus far, we have not seen John Blackwell take a Johnny Davis-like jump, but obviously that's a really hard bar to clear. He has certainly improved, and when he impresses me most is when he is going baseline, and I'd love to see more baseline sets for him in this offense. But they need to improve on defense a little bit. the Arizona game is maybe not the perfect example for their defensive ineptitude at times, but letting Arizona get out and run against them early in the second half, in particular, when they erased the deficit to tie that game at 65, kind of showed all the ways in which this Wisconsin defense can get got, particularly when teams go up tempo.
Yeah. The defensive side is interesting to me because they brought in a lot of pieces individually. This was not a good defense last year. We've talked about that. It was a poor defense last year, but they brought in a bunch of new pieces. But a lot of those pieces they brought in individually weren't necessarily great defenders.
Right.
But I do think they brought in guys that can be versatile and switch a little bit. And I've been impressed with Tonje on ball. I've been really impressed with Kamari McGee getting around the pick and roll.
Those were the two names that I would have said too.
Yep. A bigger role for Kamari McGee solves not all the issues, but I think it helps in the pick and roll defense that was really bad last year. So I think in those ways, maybe you're better, would be my hope.
I would think so. The challenge you're going to have overall is in the front court, particularly given what just feels like a lack of bodies there. Your preferred four so far this season is Carter Gilmore, and he is not the Carter Gilmore of 2 years ago. Doesn't even appear to be the Carter Gilmore of 1 year ago. He appears to be a genuinely serviceable Big Ten rotation player at this point in time. And the problem is that you don't have a real backup five. The backup five that you have is your starting four. And so that opens up a lot of liability for you if somebody in your front court, part of your rotation, gets into foul trouble, because it quickly spills not just from one position, it spills from one front court position to the other. And that's going to make it really hard to defend. It's why Greg Gard, had to maybe unwillingly play players with 2 fouls in the first half against Arizona, and why Carter Gilmore looked like he was playing defense a little bit soft in the tail end of the first half against Arizona, just because you can't keep picking up so many fouls. And part of that, of course, being the way that game was officiated. There's weird stuff in that game. But they have some pieces that look really good, I think, on the wing, in the backcourt, like you mentioned, that have been better defenders than I expected. But in the front court is where they're going to have bigger problems, and maybe is go to just close the loop on the initial question there. If you're going to have defensive questions in the front court, well, then you darn well better be able to bury the ball on the perimeter. And maybe, that means that you are just going to have to outshoot opponents in a lot of games to win.
Well, I want to give you credit on this one. We were talking before the year, and I thought, and you probably remember this, I thought playmaking, maybe point guard, the ability to initiate the offense would be a bigger problem for this team. You said front court depth. I think 4 games in, like, obviously we're dealing with small sample size here. But I think you're probably dead on with that, to be honest. I think I underestimated a little bit of what Klesman Blackwell are going to do there, what Tonje may be able to do, what Kamari McGee's able to do as an initiator. Mm-hmm. And I think I also expected more out of Xavier Amos as well, where we're not seeing maybe quite what we expected at that other 4 spot, where he's not a tough 4. Like, he doesn't solve your defensive rebounding issues, but I did think he was going to give you something that complements Crowell a little bit, give you a little more athleticism at the 4, someone who could block some shots weak side, someone who could do a little bit more of that.
We saw some of the things in spurts against Arizona that Xavier Amos can give you if he stays on the floor, right? It's mostly his 3-point shooting. There is, Steven Crowell can stretch the floor. Nolan Winter can stretch the floor, but some of that is they just have such a slow release that it's not the true stretch 4, stretch 5 that you want from them. It's Xavier Amos gives you something different. He can pull the ball and do so a little bit quickly. But some of the times that quickness in offense, letting early shots go, and even sometimes like I know you have talked about on the show, sometimes those shots early in the shot clock are good shots early in the shot clock, and you just gotta kind of let it rip. But sometimes you get a Max Klesman heat check, you get an Xavier Amos heat check, and it's like, okay, I don't know how much you want that early shot. And if Xavier Amos can find a way to stay on the floor, get a little bit more in control on the offensive side of the ball, he can help you start solving that, and being able to complement those Carter Gilmore, Nolan Winter minutes is going to help that front court go a long way. And it's, maybe I'm right early on, But there's a lot of season left for me to be wrong about a lot of things. We got 4 months of this.
No, again, it's very early sample size. You're totally right. There's a few things I think we could take from this team, and we'll let you go on this one. But what's the one thing you think you can take from this team through 4 games that you feel really confident on that you weren't necessarily confident on before the year?
They're not missing AJ Storr. They just aren't. And I think that 1-to-1 John Tonje, AJ Storr comparisons are maybe a little bit lazy and tired because they are fundamentally different players. But I understand the want to make that 1-to-1 comparison because they kind of are in the lineup, right? But they are fundamentally different players that bring fundamentally different things to this team. And John Tonje and John Blackwell as your dynamic duo on the wing bring you something very different than Storr and Blackwell did. And even Tonje brings you something different than John Blackwell does. Blackwell still has a tendency at times to play out of control on offense. He is a little bit more apt to the AJ Storr comparison at this time than John Tonje is. There was a moment in transition against Arizona in the second half when I don't remember who initially picked up the ball, but it ended up going over to John Tonje on a 2-on-1 in transition. And instead of going up to slam the ball for a dunk, which I think basically anybody would have expected any other player to do, he instead stayed on the ground, played through 2 feet, and tried to Euro step and got fouled and went to foul.
Yep.
Such a mature play in an old man play that I think Greg Gard would 100 times out of 100 prefer to have than the wild duo that an AJ Storr, John Blackwell duo would bring. And there was plenty of reason to think that the scoring punch that they were able to have last year was not going to be replicated on this team. But that athleticism on the wing and some improved defense from Tonje there is something that makes me think, no, they don't miss AJ Storr. And I think there were plenty of reasons to think going into this season that you could have seen plenty of fans throughout the season being like, man, would be really nice to have AJ Storr right now. And I just don't think we're going to get that sentiment.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. By the way, AJ Storr was more prone to missing fast break dunks and like fast break layups than any hyper athletic wing I've ever seen in my life. Like he missed so many of those shots for a legit real athlete. Like that's a real athletic wing. It would drive me bonkers. But to your other point, there's things that Blackwell or that Tonje that he does on the court. The passing on this team, like the spacing on this team created by 4 guys that can shoot around Steven Crowell. That's another thing last year. I'm not going to say this. Listen, if we had Tyler Wall, we wouldn't have been rebounded 24-2 on the glass. But we create space in such a different way than last year's team.
Yeah,
that these cutters you're seeing, three of Steven Crowell's assists against Arizona were off cutters. We're off cuts. That spacing's not there last year to run that type of action. So I think in that sense too, this team is offensively, it's just dramatically different than it looked last year because the spacing is opened up.
Yeah, I noticed it early on just how effective John Tonje was in pick and roll offense, particularly with Steven Crowell. And I don't remember who posted it earlier today. I saw it on the website formerly known as Twitter. He's like the second or third most efficient scorer in the country on pick and roll offense right now. And it's just like, just by watching, you can see it and the numbers back it up. It's the way they're able to run that offense as well as doing some of the ISO stuff that they were doing last year is, man, it's beautiful basketball to watch. Kirk, the greatest offensive coordinator hire in the year of our Lord 2023 in Madison. Kirk Penny.
Absolutely love it. And kudos to Greg Gard, to your point, like hiring the right people, being able to adapt, being open enough to change what you've done and what Bo Ryan did. Because again, it talks about stepping out of the shadow. This is not necessarily the offense that Bo Ryan would have had in place. And I don't know what he would have done in the portal. But anyway, we have to get going here. It is well past bedtime for when I keep Kedrick Stumbris. Thank you as always, man, for jumping in. Or everybody, go follow Kedrick Stumbris. We got the Twitter there. Go follow him on Scotty Sixpack as well. On Wisconsin, when you're done here, go check out Locked On Big Ten Next. All the biggest stories in the Big Ten Conference over on that channel. On Wisconsin, and we will talk later.